Only joking. I wouldn't do that to Roger. Barry Butters does. James Bond, Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die is a pretty bloody weird Bond film, but it's also pretty bloody good. I know that might sound a bit strange and confusing, but stick around and I'll explain what I mean in detail. But let's start by talking about the most obvious point, and that's the fact that we got a new James Bond. I suppose you could say that Moore is a bit less masculine, but I think it might be more accurate to say that Moore simply embodies a different type of masculinity. He's less tough, and he also plays the character as less of a bastard. He's more ironical and light-hearted, and he's more like an English gent.
You got the feeling of the English gentleman more out of Roger than you got out of Sean.
So Moore is like a stereotypical English gent. He's polite and refined, and he epitomises the English stiff upper lip, which is taken so far in fact that it almost feels like a parody at times.
Now I promise you'll stay right there. I shan't be long.
I think Moore's version of the character is also slightly kinder and gentler with women.
He finds out I've lost my pa. You kill me.
Oh, come on, you'll have to find you first.
There was always something of the fiery Scotsman about Connery's Bond.
You're doing this under orders, I know. What are they?
I don't know what you mean.
Liar.
I think one of the strengths of this film is that they're not trying to hide this difference, but they're actually playing up to it. So they take full advantage of the fact that Roger Moore is a very different actor.
Roger knew his way around a sophisticated comedy scene very well. So you could do things with Roger, right? You wrote for Roger differently.
Well, it's just a hat, darling. Belonging to a small-headed man of limited means who lost a fight with a chicken.
They're not trying to create a Connery clone, as they were with George Lazenby.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
I think Roger Moore also really plays up the cool aspect of the James Bond character. He's so calm under pressure it almost comes across as a bit of a parody at times. Just think about the scene where he's scoping out Kananga's hideout and he's smoking a cigar while hang gliding at the same time. I think this scene could seem completely ridiculous, but somehow in the hands of Roger Moore it works.
What do you think is the difference between your playing of Bond and Roger Moore's playing? I'm not asking you to compare whether you think his is better or yours is better, but what's the fundamental
I don't think
difference?
it gets down to that. I think it's just a different appetite, that's all. For example, I think that the fundamental difference is that I played Bond, and in this one as well, with the reality, credibility, and hopefully still encompassing stunts and effects and what have you, and out of it some indigenous humour. And anything that happens is possible. And I feel that Roger, which I think he may have inherited in part from after Diamonds Are Forever, where they were already getting into that area of too much hardware, that was more important, and his is a sort of parody of the character, as it were, in that situation, so that you will go for the laugh or the humour at whatever the cost of the credibility or the reality. I think that's just basically the difference. And I think he took another direction with it that way and acquired an entirely different audience.
Sometimes less is more, and sometimes more is more. And I don't even know what that means.
My name is Bond, James Bond.
We originally planned to use Roger Moore when we made Dr. No, but he wasn't available. He was working on television. And then when we recast for On Her Majesty's Service, he was again not available. And now for Live and Let Die, he was available, so we signed him up.
The TV show he's talking about is The Saint. Roger Moore was in this TV show from 1962 to 1969, where he played a very similar sort of character to James Bond.
You can reach me at the Savoy Plaza. I'll see myself out.
All right, I'll let you know what happens.
Thank you.
Simon, dear.
Not tonight, Josephine.
But it's also worth pointing out that Roger Moore had played Bond back in 1964. Not in the films, of course, but in a comedy sketch on television.
Perhaps Monsieur would like to take drinks on the patio?
Yes. That's quite a nice little casino you've got there. A nice secluded corner.
Over there, Mr. Bond?
Yes, well, I am on holiday. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Smith.
Oh!
Yes, and I'm 007, as if you didn't know.
James Bond, what are you doing at my hotel?
And what, may I ask, is Sonia Slakova, Russia's master spy, staying at my hotel?
But while it's all a bit more tongue-in-cheek this time around, they do serve up all of the things that people associate with a Bond formula. They put Roger Moore in lots of sharp suits. Although this time around, for some reason, Bond don't wear a DJ. And while Sean Connery's Bond was always smoking cigarettes, Roger Moore's Bond is always smoking cigars. He even prefers a different type of drink.
A martini, shaken, not stirred.
Bourbon, no ice, please.
And you got quite a lot of glamorous girls, of course. You still got gadgets. Old Roger Moore's got this magnetic watch, and it's also got a saw that can cut through rope. And he's also got a Walter PPK, but this henchman called Teehee destroys it. But then he's got another Walter PPK later on, and this is when he interrogates Rosie. And then at the end he's using a 44 Magnum, and this packs a real punch. In fact, it's a Smith & Wesson Model 29, which is the same gun used in Dirty Harry. And you got the same basic conflict between good and evil, so you got Bond as a symbol of good, and Mr. Big or Kananga as a symbol of evil. In short, it serves up the escapism that everyone associates with the James Bond films. And in time-honoured fashion, you got a scene with M and Moneypenny, but it all takes place in a single scene. And in fact, the tone of this scene is very light-hearted and comical, and it allows Moore to stamp his authority on the character of Bond. You've even got James Bond making M a cup of coffee.
Is that all it does?
In fact, I do think they go a bit too far, and this scene is a bit like a sex comedy. You got a girl hiding in a closet, and you got Bond worried about M discovering her.
You wouldn't happen to know where she is?
Ah, Miss Moneypenny.
And then he demonstrates the power of his magnetic watch on M's spoon.
Good God.
It's all a bit silly, but it does tell the audience that in this film we're going to see a different type of Bond. We're going to see Roger Moore's more light-hearted interpretation of the character. But there ain't no cue this time.
Hello?
And we got a new Felix Leiter again.
Your friend Kanang has just left the UN. He's probably headed back to his embassy. No, don't worry. I've got the place eyeballed, wired for sound, the works. Right. I'll see you in about a half hour.
And by the way, it's not the priest from The Exorcist.
What is it?
Although, come to think of it, if Bond had invited a priest, he might have been able to help with all the voodoo. And we also got this character called Quarrel Jr.
Rosie Carver, meet the man who shares my hairbrush. Quarrel Jr.
and he's the son of Quarrel from Dr. No.
This is Quarrel. He's been helping me.
No hard feelings, I hope.
Only a sore hand. Glad to know you, Mr. Bond.
And then of course we got a Bond girl, played by Jane Seymour this time. Very nice.
Pick a card. Hand it over. You have found yourself.
And then you got this actor called Yaphet Kotto who's playing a villain. And I have to say, I really like this actor. He makes a pretty good villain, I'd say. The thing is, he's very softly spoken, but he sometimes erupts into spontaneous rage, which makes him very scary and unpredictable. In my opinion, he's a bit of an underrated villain in the franchise.
Your power exists to serve me, and it is mine to control. If and when the time comes I decide you are to lose it, I myself will take it away. Solitaire, go to sleep. You have made me angry with you, and I have no wish to be. T.
And you've also got three very distinctive henchmen in this film. First of all, you got Teehee.
Funny how the least little thing amuses him.
Then you got Whisper.
Your champagne, sir.
What was that?
Your champagne.
Put it on the table, thanks.
Then you got Baron Samedi. It's all a bit wild and crazy this time around. You've even got human contortionists. And of course, no review of Live and Let Die is really complete without mentioning J.W. Pepper. But I know some fans of the series find him very irritating, so he does tend to divide opinion. But I quite like him because I think he fits in with the tone of the film, and lots of his scenes are genuinely funny because he's so out of his depth.
Would you enlighten the sheriff, please?
Yes, sir. J.W., let me have a word with you. J.W., now this fellow's from London, England. He's an Englishman working in cooperation with our boys, a sort of secret agent.
Secret agent?
But despite the different interpretation of the Bond character and the more light-hearted tone, it still feels like a James Bond film. And this is partly because it retains all the same sort of set pieces. You've got your old car chases. And this film has got a fantastic boat chase sequence. And you've got fist fights.
Mr. Bond, it's good to see you again.
And you got your gunfights, of course. And we got a very exciting daring escape this time. And you got all your lovely explosions again. And you've got a fair number of sex scenes in this film too.
It's the time before we leave for lesson number 3.
Absolutely. There's no sense in going off half-cocked.
But they also throw in a few more comical set pieces.
Good morning, you're...
Mrs. Bell, you're not my instructor. Where's Mr. Bleeker?
Indisposed. I'll be giving the lesson.
Holy shit.
Another way that they introduce comedy into this film is with a fish out of water theme, because they have quite a lot of fun with the idea of an English gent in Harlem.
Sure hope you make friends easy. Right on, brother.
Relax, baby. Mr. Big's gonna take care of you in a minute.
Hello, Jim. What's happening, baby?
In the novel, Bond actually pretends to be American as part of his cover. So it goes, he spent the morning on Fifth Avenue, wandering aimlessly, gazing into shop windows and watching the passing crowds. He gradually assimilated the casual gait and manners of a visitor from out of town, and when he tested himself out in a few shops and asked the way of several people, he found that nobody looked at him twice. And none of this is in the film, of course, where Roger Moore is so English that he sticks out like a sore thumb.
Good afternoon. Bourbon and water, please.
Live and Let Die also borrows lots of elements from earlier Bond films. So for example, you've got a car chase involving the police, where Bond encounters some sort of obstacle that he then manages to get past, much to the surprise of the police. Whereas in Diamonds it's a dead end, in Live and Let Die it's a low bridge. You've even got the reintroduction of a monorail from You Only Live Twice.
An underground monorail. Connected to the last refuge of a scoundrel, no doubt.
And of course you got James Bond escaping from sharks, and this is an element they borrowed from Thunderball. And then of course you got the fight on a train at the end, an idea that they got from Russia with Love.
When Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli first asked me to play Bond in Live and Let Die, naturally the first thing I did was read the script. To my horror, I realized that I would have to get myself in a much fitter condition than I normally keep myself. I'm fortunate, but I do have a swimming pool at home, which I use at 6 o'clock in the morning, but I realized that was not quite enough, so I spend half an hour in the pool in the morning and half an hour of fairly strenuous exercise. The reason being, in Live and Let Die, I'm required as Bond to do things I've never done before. Fight 1,500 alligators. Be towed behind a boat in a glider. And also drive powerboats. Oh, I've putted around in the Mediterranean in little boats, but I've never driven them at really high speed or performed some of the horrendous stunts that I'm expected to do in this.
Live and Let Die has a very unique flavour among the Bond films. It's very unusual and one of a kind. One of the main reasons for this unique sense of flavour is that the film was released when blaxploitation was very popular. You've got derogatory racial slurs like honky.
125th, you got a honky on your tail.
You've got black gangsters.
Whose funeral is it? Yours.
And you've also got the language and dialect of a black inner city subculture.
Is this the stupid mother that tailed you uptown?
There seems to be some mistake. My name is...
Names is for tombstones, baby. You all take this honky out and waste him, now!
It's also worth pointing out that this is the first film where James Bond is romantically involved with a black girl. So this is a Bond film that's very bold and distinctive, and it's therefore a bit of an oddity in the Bond canon. People who aren't familiar with blaxploitation are going to be pretty confused by this film, and it will probably be misunderstood. But I think Live and Let Die does a great job in bringing blaxploitation to a mainstream audience.
Me and you gonna tangle sooner or later. Why don't you stop playing with yourself, Willie? You ain't gonna do shit.
Now, in terms of the story, it all kicks off with 3 MI6 agents being killed in mysterious circumstances. You got one at the United Nations in New York City, then you got another one in New Orleans, and then you got another agent being killed on a small Caribbean island, the fictional island of San Monique. And in response to these 3 murders, James Bond is sent to New York to investigate. And Bond's investigation leads him to Harlem, where he meets Solitaire, and she's a tarot card reader who can see into the future. So this film's got a supernatural element to it. But Bond also meets Mr. Big. He's a mob boss who runs a chain of restaurants throughout the United States. Mr. Big then tells his henchmen to kill Bond, but Bond manages to overpower them in an alleyway. And then he makes his escape with the help of the CIA agent, Strutter. But at this stage in his investigation, Bond can't really figure out why the most powerful black gangster in New York is apparently working in cooperation with Kananga, who's the political leader of San Monique. Bond then flies to San Monique, where he meets up with another CIA agent called Rosie Carver. And then Bond's friend and ally, Quarrel Jr., takes him on a boat to Solitaire's home. But along the way, Bond finds out that Rosie is a double agent who's working for Kananga. Then Rosie runs off and she tries to escape, but she's killed by a coconut. Bond then makes his way to Solitaire's home and he seduces her. But when Bond takes her virginity, she realises that she's lost her ability to tell the future. She now reckons that she's useless to Kananga and her life is in danger, so she then decides to team up with Bond. With the help of Quarrel Jr., Bond and Solitaire then escape by boat. And then they fly to New Orleans. But when Bond arrives in New Orleans, he's captured by Mr. Big. And at this point, he removes his prosthetic face and reveals himself to be Kananga.
Quite revealing.
He then explains to Bond that he's been producing heroin, and he's been protecting his poppy fields by using the cult of Baron Samedi. But after Bond is taken away, Kananga also reveals that he's angry with Solitaire. He's angry because he knows that Solitaire had sex with Bond and then lost her ability to see the future. Kananga then gives Solitaire to Baron Samedi to be sacrificed. Meanwhile, Kananga's main henchman Tee-Hee takes Bond to a crocodile farm where he's going to be eaten alive. But Bond manages a really daring escape by jumping across the back of these crocodiles. And this is a really amazing stunt, particularly if you have a look at the behind the scenes footage. Then Bond sets the drug lab on fire. He steals a speedboat and he escapes. We then get the famous boat chase sequence. which also introduces the character of Sheriff J.W. Pepper.
Now you listen to me, Trooper boy. We got a swarm full of black Russians driving boats to beat the dam down here.
At this point in the story, Bond then travels back to San Monique with the help of Quarrel Jr. And with the help of Quarrel Jr., he sets timed explosives throughout the poppy fields. He also manages to rescue Solitaire from a voodoo sacrifice. Bond and Solitaire then escape underground to Kananga's secret base, but Kananga then captures them again. He ties them up and he starts to lower them into a shark tank, but Bond manages to escape by using his trusty magnetic watch. Bond then kills Kananga by forcing him to swallow a compressed gas pellet. His body inflates like a balloon and then he explodes, which I have to say is pretty bloody stupid, but there you go. And then we've got a little sequence at the end of the film. Bond and Solitaire leave the country by train, but unbeknown to them, Teehee has managed to sneak aboard and he attempts to kill Bond, but Bond manages to get the better of him by cutting the wires of his prosthetic arm, and then he shucks him out the fucking window. But as the film ends, we see a picture of a laughing Sandy who's sitting on the front of the train, and this is the shot that brings this rather unusual Bond film to an end. Why is everyone drinking milk? Roger's at it too. It's making me thirsty. Hold on, I just remembered. I don't even like milk. It's weird, drinking animal milk. It's perverted. That's better. I'd have to say we got a pretty solid Bond girl this time around too. She's not two-dimensional and she's kinda similar to the way she is in the novel. And Jane Seymour also gives a good performance. And the character of Solitaire is quite interesting. She's not completely two-dimensional like some of the Bond girls. It's quite varied in fact. You've got quite a lot of character progression in this film. First of all, Jane Seymour has to play a mysterious fortune teller, and then she has to play the lover and confidant of James Bond. And then finally she plays the damsel in distress. And Jane Seymour plays all of these roles very competently. And she's pretty similar to the character in the novel too. In the novel, Solitaire is introduced in chapter 7. So it goes: there was a moment's pause and then a section of the bookcase to the right of the desk swung open. One of the most beautiful women Bond had ever seen came slowly in and closed the door behind her. And then further down the page, Mr. Big explains, "This is an extraordinary woman, Mr. Bond, and I'm going to marry her because she is unique. I found her in a cabaret in Haiti, where she was born. She was doing a telepathic act." Something else that they retain from the novel is Bond's professional distance from Solitaire. So if you have a look in chapter 12, it goes, Bond was careful to divulge very little of what he himself knew or guessed. His growing warmth towards Solitaire and his desire for her body were in a compartment which had no communicating door with his professional life. The film also retains this sense of professional distance, because Bond don't allow himself to become emotionally involved with Solitaire. In fact, he lies and manipulates her in order to complete his mission. So he pretends to be all caring to her face to win her confidence.
James, he'll be looking for me now. I know he'll never stop.
Come on, darling. It's all over.
Then he lies behind her back and uses her as bait.
Hamilton was killed in New Orleans, so there has to be a connection. And this is a valuable piece of merchandise we're carrying, which with any luck they'll want back.
But they also add 2 additional girls who aren't in the novel. First of all, you got the Italian girl at the start, and then you got Rosie Carver. So in this way, it follows the approach of earlier Bonds like Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, in adding extra eye candy. It also follows the novel in having a much smaller scale story. It's not about a supervillain who's trying to take over the world this time. Instead, it's just about Bond foiling the plans of an American gangster who's involved in drug trafficking. And this is also a very popular theme in blaxploitation films. One of the differences between the novel and the film is that the plot in the film revolves around heroin smuggling, whereas in the novel it's all about gold smuggling. I guess they might have changed it because it would have been a bit too similar to Goldfinger. In the novel there's also a connection to Russia and Smersh. So in chapter 2 of the novel, Bond wonders what's happened to Smersh. And he goes, was it still as powerful, still as efficient? Who controlled it now that Beria was gone? And then he refers back to the previous novel, which is Casino Royale. And it goes, after the great gambling case in which he had been involved at Royale Lazur, Bond had sworn to get back at them. He had told M as much at the last interview. And funnily enough, Bond's intuition here is right, because during the course of the novel we find out that Mr. Big is an agent of Smersh, and he's in cahoots with the Russians. And none of this is in the film, of course, but there you go. It all starts with M telling Bond that Henry Morgan's treasure has been found in the United States. So here you go, this is M talking to Bond. All minted before 1650. Bloody Morgan, the pirate, was Governor and Commander-in-Chief of Jamaica from 1674 to 1683. And then a bit later he goes, and both Spinks and the British Museum agree this is almost certainly part of Bloody Morgan's treasure. So Bond's mission is to find out how the treasure of Henry Morgan has ended up in the United States. And then M continues, and the hell of a treasure it must be. So far, nearly 1,000 of these and similar coins have turned up in the United States. And then M also tells Bond, with the help of the FBI, we've traced the ownership of this boat and of the island to a man called Mr. Big, a black gangster, lives in Harlem. But M also tells Bond about the Russian connection. So he goes, in short, continued M, we suspect that this Jamaican treasure is being used to finance the Soviet espionage system. In the novel, Felix Leiter is also mauled by sharks, and this is something that they don't include in the film, but it does make its way into License to Kill. So here you go, this is in chapter 14. So this is after Bond discovers Felix Leiter's body, and he just puts down a telephone. He put down a receiver and looked vaguely at the paper in his hand. It was a rough piece of white wrapping paper. Scrawled in pencil in ragged block letters were the words, he disagreed with something that ate him. Live and Let Die also contains a brilliant passage on life and death. In fact, I think it's worth reading because it's an indication of how good Fleming was at writing. And if you haven't read any of the novels, maybe this might persuade you. So this passage occurs when Bond is on a plane, and it goes, they were flying at 15,000 feet when, just after crossing Cuba, they ran into one of those violent tropical storms that suddenly turn aircraft from comfortable drawing rooms into bucketing death traps. The great plane staggered and plunged, its screws now roaring in vacuum and now biting harshly into walls of solid air. The thin tube shuddered and swung, crockery crashed in the pantry, and huge rain hammered on the Perspex windows. Bond gripped the arms of his chair so that his left hand hurt and cursed softly to himself. He looked at the racks of magazines and thought, they won't help much when the steel tires at 15,000 feet, nor will the eau de cologne in the washroom, nor the personalised meals, the free razor, the orchid for your lady, now trembling in the icebox. Least of all the safety belts and the life jackets with a whistle that the steward demonstrates will really blow, nor the cute little rescue lamp that glows red. No, when the stresses are too great for the tired metal, when the ground mechanic who checks the de-icing equipment is crossed in love and skimps his job way back in London, Idlewild, Gander, Montreal, when those or many things happen, then a little warm room with propellers in front falls straight down out of the sky, into the sea, or onto the land, heavier than air, fallible, vain. And the 40 little heavier than air people, fallible within the plane's fallibility, vain within its larger vanity, fall down with it and make little holes in the land, or little splashes in the sea, which is anyway their destiny. So why worry? You are linked to the ground mechanic's careless fingers in Nassau, just as you are linked to the weak head of the little man in the family saloon, who mistakes the red light for the green, and meets you head on, for the first and last time, as you are motoring quietly home from some private sin. There's nothing to do about it. You start to die the moment you are born. The whole of life is cutting through the pack with death, so take it easy, light a cigarette, and be grateful you are still alive, as you suck the smoke deep into your lungs. Your stars have already let you come quite a long way since you left your mother's womb, and whimpered at the cold air of the world. While we're here, I guess it's also worth pointing out that Bond is quite a lot more human in the novels than he is in the films. So he does feel fear in the novels. So if you look in chapter 18, you can see how Bond feels before he has to go diving in deep water. And it goes, and yet he shivered at the prospect of the dark adventure under the sea that he had already put off in his mind until tomorrow. Suddenly he loathed and feared the sea and everything in it, the millions of tiny antennae that would stir and point as he went by that night, the eyes that would wake and watch him, the pulses that would miss for the hundredth of a second and then go beating quietly on, the jelly tendrils that would grope and reach for him, as blind in the light as in the dark. He would be walking through thousands of millions of secrets, in 300 yards, alone and cold. He would be blundering through a forest of mystery towards a deadly citadel, whose guardians had already killed 3 men. And then at the end of his adventure in chapter 22, it goes even further in this direction, because after a brush with death, Bond cries for the first time since his childhood. So look at this. The first tears since his childhood came into James Bond's blue-grey eyes and ran down his drawn cheeks into the blood-stained sea. In general, I think of Live and Let Die as a success. It's actually a much smaller scale story than the previous films. If you think of Diamonds or On Her Majesty's Secret Service and You Only Live Twice, these were all films about James Bond saving the world. But Live and Let Die only really concerns drug smuggling, so it's not about world domination at all. And it's not about Spectre neither. I do really appreciate this element of the story, because I never really understood why the plots so often revolve around the fate of the entire world. I guess the problem is they started doing this in Thunderball, and then it became part of the audience's expectations. Because once James Bond saves the world on one occasion, the audience is going to expect him to do it every time. But then that has the danger of being very repetitive. So Live and Let Die actually breaks this cycle. And I think the film manages to hit a kind of sweet spot of changing things just enough to make it interesting, while also having enough of the same so that it still feels like a James Bond film. So I think this film manages to pull off the difficult task of following Connery, but it also feels new and distinctive, and Moore stamps his own personality on the role of Bond. Sean Connery's Bond was always pretty serious. Now, moments of comedy were sprinkled in here and there, but in general Connery played the role very serious. But Roger Moore is much more adept at comedy. His performance is very tongue-in-cheek, in a way that Connery's performance never was. Roger Moore was doing Austin Powers before Austin Powers. And I think you've also got an interesting and unusual Bond girl, who also happens to be very similar to the character in the novel. In addition to that, you've got a very effective villain, played very competently by Yaphet Kotto. You've also got some pretty cool stunts, like the alligator escape, and some fun chases like the brilliant speedboat chase, which is really the highlight of the movie. On the downside, this film does contain the most ridiculous execution in a Bond film, the inflation of Mr. Big. I feel like Mr. Big was a pretty good villain, and he deserved a better send-off than this. Yeah, so there you go, 7 out of 10 ain't bad. But to be honest with you, I found this film very difficult to score, because it's such an unusual sort of film, and it's bound to divide opinion. I can sort of understand why some people might not like it. And as always with these reviews, you can't ignore the fact that some of this is very subjective. It's horses for courses when it comes down to it. But anyway, that about wraps it up. So that's 8 down and 17 to go. And this is Barry Butters signing out, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Ian, this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?